Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Monday, April 19th, and we're breaking down this 6-game slate that we have over on DraftKings today. Not the greatest slate in the world, not the worst either, but hey, I can always get down for some baseball on a Monday evening. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. While you're at it, you might as well hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. If you don't follow me over on social media, handles in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and get access to some extra content, I got projections, my optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, and all that fun stuff in the link down below. But I think that's it for the plug, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we will start with the pitching position and move on to the bats. And we'll start up top with Joe Musgrove at $10,200 in a matchup versus Milwaukee at home in Petco Park. And does he feel a little bit too expensive? Yes, but with the way the pitching is on today's slate, he does look like the overall best option. So if you had the money for him, I don't feel too bad getting up to him. And he's had a pretty good start to the season so far. Obviously, he had that no-hitter where he had like 53 DraftKings points. But outside of that, he's still been solid. Had 15 points versus Pittsburgh. He'd probably be looking for a little bit more points there. But then he had 31 points versus Arizona in his first start. Overall, the strikeouts have been pretty good as well. So I do think we can get behind some Joe Musgrove. He did show us nice strikeout upside last year, and it's kind of carrying over to this season. But in nearly 40 innings last year, he had a 33% K rate, 3.19 xFIP. Walks have been an issue with him. He does give up a little bit of power, especially to lefties. But this matchup versus Milwaukee is actually a pretty good one. They do strike out quite a bit versus right-handed pitching. I know Christian Yelich obviously helps things as well. And they only have a 3.2 implied team total against him. He has a slight favor here and a 6.5 K prop over in Vegas. And Petco's a good place to pitch as well. So I can definitely get behind some Joe Musgrove here. Dustin May, $9,700. I like the matchup here versus Seattle, and he's a very heavy favorite here, only a 3.55 implied team total against him. Throws the ball really hard as well. The only problem is he does have a pretty short leash. He got into a little bit of trouble versus the Rockies, and he got yanked in 71 pitches, so that's something you have to be a little bit worried about here, especially for a guy that's nearly $10,000. At that point, I'd rather get the Joe Musgrove because he feels overall safer to me, plus he showed more strikeout upside in the past. So I prefer Joe Musgrove over Dustin May here, but I do like the matchup here versus Seattle Mariners, or a team that will strike out quite a bit versus righties, and there's a lot of young guys on that team, and they can definitely make some mistakes. So I like Dustin May here, but I do prefer going up to Joe Musgrove for only $500 more. Diving to the mid-range here to more of these SP2 options, we have Jack Flaherty at $8,500, who I feel like is a bit underpriced, so I can definitely buy in to the price tag here. Does have a team total above 4 against him. Is a slight favorite though, and he does have a 7K prop over in Vegas, which does look pretty good. He got off to a really rocky start to the season facing Cincinnati and Great American Small Park, and they've been an offense that's been hitting pretty well this year, so I'm willing to give him a pass there. But versus Miami and Washington, he had 26 and 22 fantasy points, and he's facing Washington once again. I don't see why we can't have a similar performance here because he's an overall pretty darn solid pitcher with ace-level stuff. Last season, he had 3.42 xFIP, which was much better than his ERA close to 5, a K rate close to 30%. Can walk some guys, but for the most part, gets a decent amount of ground balls, doesn't allow too much hard contact, and overall pretty solid pitcher. In Washington, while they do have some pretty good players on their team like Trey Turner, Juan Soto, even Josh Bell, Kyle Schwarber's not that bad, so it's not an offense I tend to try to pick on. It's just relative to the slate, I think he's a fine pitching option because of that price point and the kind of talent that he has, but there is some level of concerns there, but I think he's overall fine. And for the most part, I don't have any strong leans on these pitchers. This isn't the greatest pitching slate in the world, so I'm going to try to mix and match these guys for the most part. And then Dylan Bundy, $7,700. Anytime there's a pitcher going up against Texas, they are playable, and Dylan Bundy's not a bad pitcher. Looking at last year's numbers, it was actually a decent sample size compared to the rest of these pitchers, 65 innings, but 3.2 ERA, 3.75 xFIP, 27% K rate, doesn't really walk too many guys, and gives up virtually barely any power whatsoever. I think, in the past, Dylan Bundy was a guy that definitely struggled with power in Baltimore, but he certainly fixed those issues. Only .69 home runs per 9 innings last year, 30% hard contact rate, home run per fly ball ratio. So I can definitely get behind Dylan Bundy here in this matchup versus Texas, who has one of the worst lineups in the entire league. Looking at their splits last season versus righties, 25% K rate, 78 WRC+, 215 batting average, and an ISO below 150. So I can definitely get behind some Dylan Bundy here at that price point. I'd imagine he's going to be a pretty popular SP2 on today's slate because the Angels, there is no Vegas stuff out yet, but I assume they're going to be pretty heavy favorites here going up against Arihara, I believe that's how you say his last name. The Angels should be the best stack on the entire slate, so Dylan Bundy could get you a cheap win here as well. Then if you want to go a little bit cheaper, I'm not super confident in Danny Duffy here, but he has gotten out to a pretty good start to the season. I think he scored around 25 fantasy points in each of his first 2 starts. And I don't mind using lefties versus the Rays. I know they strike out quite a bit versus righties, and some of their guys have some better numbers versus left-handed pitching. Randy Arizarena's got some great splits versus them. Rosayu, Willie Adames, and then Yandy Diaz does as well. But there's still some of their better bats are lefties, Brandon Lau and Austin Meadows. So I think Danny Duffy might be a somewhat viable option here. And his strikeout rate was decent last year at 24% K rate. Had a handful of strikeouts so far this season in each of his starts. Don't like his ERA or xFIP. They're both sitting around 4.95, which is not great. And he had an ISO giving up close to 200. So I don't think he's going to come out here and mow down the lineup. But he doesn't typically give up a lot of hard contact. Only 26% hard contact rate last year. And when we look at the Rays splits versus lefties last season, I mean, they struck out a lot, 28.5% K rate, so that's the one positive thing here, but they did have an ISO above 200, 121 WRC plus, and 11% walk rate, and batting average is pretty low, but batting average is pretty low all around last season. So Danny Duffy, while he can be a bit of a dangerous pitcher to roster here, I think it's $7,000 with a team total below 4 against him, and he's actually a slight favorite. I think he's viable down low, even though it might not be the greatest thing in the world. But with that being said, I think that's it for the pitching, so let's move on to the bats. As always, we'll start with the catcher position, then move around the diamond and hit the outfield as well. But catcher is not a good spot today for the spend down option, so hopefully maybe there's a couple surprise starts where we get some cheap catchers that are viable. But as of right now, I am not liking what I'm seeing. But a couple guys up top, I do like Salvador Perez, $4,900. Salvador Perez, $4,900, one of the best hitting catchers in the league the past couple of seasons, and you can definitely look to use him versus Josh Fleming here. Now, their team total is only 4.1, so I'm not really trying to stack up the Royals by any means, but his numbers have been so good the past couple of seasons, and just looking at last year in a 156 plate appearance sample size, he batted .333, .410 WOBA, 300 ISO, 162 WRC plus, and a .633 slugging. Doesn't really walk at all, but versus lefties, I mean, he had some overall pretty strong numbers as well, so I can get behind some Salvador Perez here. Again, not really trying to pick on the Rays too much with the Royals, but a couple one-offs aren't that bad if you just want some cheap righties and a righty on lefty matchup. Will Smith, $4,700, one of the best hitting catchers in the league on pretty much the best offense in the league. I know Cody Bellinger hurts things a little bit for this team, but they currently have the highest implied team total on the slate at 4.95. I feel like the Angels, once their line comes out, they will have the highest implied team total. Should probably be above 5 there versus Arihara. They're in just a really good spot, and they grade out pretty well for me. And plus, they're a little bit cheap. So over on DraftKings, I mean, I think they're by far the best stack on the entire slate. They will be pretty chalky is my assumption, but still I think in cash games, that's where you're going to want to go. Also like them in tournaments as well. But Will Smith, he's great versus righties or lefties. He's actually better versus righties than he is lefties. Doesn't mean we can't use a catcher batting cleanup on pretty much the best offense in the entire league at $4,700. So I do like Will Smith here if you got the money to spend up for him. And if you want to save a little bit of money, we have Kurt Suzuki at $3,600 going up against Arihara, who just doesn't really profile as a big strikeout guy. I know his last start was really good. He had 25 points, had 5 strikeouts, doesn't really walk guys whatsoever, only 1 walk so far, and I forget exactly how many innings he's went, but it's been 3 starts so far, and he's only walked 1 guy, and that was in the second game. But in the previous 2 starts, besides the last one, he only had 1 strikeout in both of those starts. So he's going to give these guys pitches to hit, and there's a lot of guys that can do damage versus him. Kurt Suzuki, he's not a big strikeout guy. He usually is a high contact hitter, and going up against a pitcher that's been pitching to contact so far, I think that there's plenty of upside here at $3,600, and I assume the Angels will have the highest implied team total on the slate. If they don't have the highest, should be right there. Should be right up there with the Dodgers. So I can get behind some Kurt Suzuki here. He's fine versus lefties and righties. If Ben Boom happened to make the lineup, he's pretty cheap. You get that lefty on righty matchup, so maybe we should root for that to happen just to get some value at catcher. But either way, like the Angels catcher today, whoever it will be. Dropping out of first base, we have Shohei Ohtani at $4,600. He's also eligible in the outfield as well. He's one of my favorite plays in the entire slate. He might end up being the highest owned batter on the entire slate. Just trying to figure out where people are going to go. I assume the Angels are going to be pretty popular, and that price point's not that bad on Ohtani. And since he has dual position eligibility, I imagine he's just going to get sprinkled in a lot of lineups today. So look out for some real big Ohtani chalk, but he makes plenty of sense here. He crushes right-handed pitching, and Arihara, not a pitcher I'm too scared of. He should give him plenty of pitches to hit, and I love the Angel stack today, and he's going to hit it in the prime spot in the order. So can definitely get behind a lot of Ohtani today. Personally, one of my favorite plays on the slate. Then Yandy Diaz, $3,500. I know I mentioned Duffy as a decent play, but that doesn't mean we can't use guys against him as well. He will give some power, especially to the righties. And, his xFIP last season was close to 5. I know he's been on a solid start to start the season, but not an elite pitcher. He's still hittable. Yandy Diaz is the guy that doesn't really strike out too much, puts the ball in play, and he should be leading off here versus a left-handed pitcher. He does not have a lot of power in his bat, which I say this every time, but it's crazy. When you look at him, you'd think he'd be Barry Bonds or something, but that's certainly not the case. He has a really high ground ball rate as well, but high batting average, doesn't really strike out too much, walks quite a bit as well, so I think he's playable at $3,500, but I'm not really trying to stack the Rays here. Then Brandon Belt, $3,400. So I'm thinking I'm going to end up playing Ohtani in the outfield because Brandon Belt grades out as one of my favorite plays today relative to his price point. Because if you look at his numbers last season, he crushed right-handed pitching, like absolutely crushed it. He would get a lot more recognition if he didn't play for the Giants because they're just a pretty boring team these days. But looking at his numbers last year, 147 plate appearance sample size versus righties, he batted .350, 464 WOBA, 309 ISO, 197 WRC+, OPS close to 1100, strikeout rate below 20%, and a walk rate close to 20%, with only a 28% ground ball rate. He has a pretty good matchup here versus Chase Anderson, who was a pitcher that wasn't that great last year. 33 inning sample size, he had an ERA above 7. xFIP was a lot better at 4.09, so it did get a bit unlucky. He does have a decent K rate at 25%, but he gave up plenty of power. 307 ISO last season, 315 batting average, 622 slugging, 412 WOBA, and on base percentage above 350, with a decent amount of home runs per innings at 2.94. So there's certainly some upside here for Brandon Belt. And versus lefties last season, he had a 6.62 xFIP with a 328 ISO given up and a 328 batting average. So I think Brandon Belt, at the price tag, is one of the best plays on these slates. So I'm probably going to get to Ohtani in the outfield, and I'm going to look to probably play Brandon Belt at first base today, especially in cash games. Also get the park upgrade going to Philly from San Francisco. Then dropping down to second base, we have Chris Taylor, who's also eligible in the outfield. Second base doesn't look like a great position today. I'm honestly probably just going to get to David Fletcher right in the middle there at $3,700. But Taylor, he's got fine splits versus both lefties and righties, and he's going to be hitting the middle of the order for one of the best stacks on the slate today for the LA Dodgers. Justin Sheffield, he does have some upside there, but he can struggle at times as well. So Chris Taylor, I do like him quite a bit just because the second base position isn't that great today, but I feel like I'm just going to get the David Fletcher and save some money because he's $1,000 cheaper, and I feel like he's almost in a better spot here at $3,700. And he's a guy, hits for high contact, doesn't really strike out whatsoever. Last season, only a 10% K rate, and Ari Hart doesn't look like a guy that's going to miss many bats in this game, and I do assume the Angels will have the highest implied team total today, if not close to it. So David Fletcher leading off for one of my favorite stacks, if not my favorite stack. I think he makes a lot of sense there, especially at his price point at $3,700. Just feels a little bit too cheap in my opinion. Then Matt Carpenter, $3,100. If you just want cheap lefty power versus Joe Ross, when I say cheap, I mean cheap. He's only $3,100, should be here in the middle of the order. He does strike out quite a bit, but he does have a little bit of pop in his bat versus right-handed pitching. Joe Ross, decent start to the season so far, but I don't really think he profiles as that great of a pitcher. I know he's had some flashes in the past, but I still like Matt Carpenter here for the price point. And the St. Louis Cardinals do have a team total above 4, which I know doesn't look super impressive, but 4.35 for an implied team total doesn't look too bad right now because the rest of the teams in the slate don't really have the highest totals in the world. So I don't hate Carpenter here at $3,100 and maybe a couple Cardinals as well. Dropping out of third base, you have Justin Turner, $5,500, who's always in play versus a left-handed pitcher. Dodgers do a team total close to 5, which they typically do almost every single slate because of how good their offense is, even without Cody Bellinger. But Turner's a guy, plenty of pop versus left-handed pitching, overall pretty strong numbers, high batting average last season above 300, high WOBA, high WRC+, decent amount of ISO. So yeah, Justin Turner is a fine play if you get the money for him, but I'm probably only going to get there in Dodger stacks today. Alec Boehm here, $3,500, mainly just a price play here. I don't really like picking on Kevin Gausman. He had above a 30% K rate last season to both lefties and righties. They give up a little bit of pop versus lefties and versus righties, not as much, but still at $3,500, I think he's a viable play here. Not that I really think he grades out super well. Kevin Gausman's a guy that can certainly mow down a few of these Phillies bats here because he has been a pretty solid pitcher in recent seasons, improved upon his abilities, but I think if you need a cheap third baseman, Alec Boehm is fine here, but I'd probably rather get the Jose Rojas. And the problem is we can't play more than 5 Angels, and I feel like I'm going to talk about quite a few more. So at some point, we're going to have to get different at different positions. But Alec Boehm, for the price point, does great as a decent value play here. Does hit for a high batting average and doesn't really strike out too much and has a good WOBA on base percentage and things like that. So if you can just get on base a couple of times, I don't think he's terrible. Jose Rojas, $3,400, didn't have any numbers last season, so obviously we have nothing to go off there. But versus Arihara, he's just a cheap third baseman, lefty on righty matchup here versus that hasn't really shown much strikeout upside, so I think you can get the Rojas if you're just looking for a cheap Angels bat. Dropping that shortstop, Corey Seager, $5,700, lefty on lefty matchup, so I don't love it. I really like Corey Seager versus righties, but his numbers obviously are a bit worse versus lefties, but even then it's not that bad. 17% K rate, OPS close to 1,000, 232 ISO, 275 batting average. These aren't bad numbers. They're just not as good as his astronomical numbers versus right-handed pitching. But if you are stacking the Dodgers, people will probably leave off Corey Seager because of the price point and just the lefty-on-lefty matchup, but I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Paul DeJong, $3,800, cheap Cardinal here versus Joe Ross. Again, not the greatest pitcher in the world. I know he's had a decent start to the season, but Paul DeJong in the past has shown upside versus right-handed pitching, a little bit of pop versus them, so $3,800. It's not a bad price point for a position that doesn't look too great today. Jose Iglesias, $3,400. He actually hasn't been doing too bad, and looking at his numbers last season, he hit for a 373 batting average, a 407 WOBA, 162 WRC plus, 400 on base percentage, only 11% K rate, and OPS close to 1,000 for $3,400. I know he hits near the bottom of the order, but if you just want a cheap angel bat at a position that's not too great today, Jose Iglesias does grade out pretty well for me. I would not be surprised if you'd get there in cash games today. And moving on to the outfield, we have Mike Trout, huge price point of $6,000. I'm going to try my very, very best to fit him in the lineup today because he's in an elite spot here versus Arihara. I mean, Mike Trout is just an elite bat versus right-handed pitching. Obviously the best player in baseball, but he absolutely murders right-handed pitching. Last season, batting average close to 300, ISO close to 400, WRC plus at 180. You guys get the idea. You don't need me to tell you that Mike Trout is a good baseball player, but he crushes righties, 52% fly ball rate versus them last year, and he's going to put the ball play here versus Arihara, and it's probably going to go pretty far. So I'm a huge fan of Mike Trout today. I'm going to really try my best to get him in for cash games. Jared Walsh, $5,100, probably more of a GPP option here because of the price point. Also eligible at first base as well, but I'd rather get to Ohtani and Brandon Belt at first base. So he's only in play for me if you're full on stacking the Angels. You don't even have to go 1 through 5 today because the guys we have on the slate, there's a lot of good cheap options for the Angels at spots that aren't the greatest. So you don't have to do like a 1 through 5 stack if you want to just kind of mix it up. I think that'd be fine, but Jared Walsh hasn't been too bad this year. Should be in the cleanup spot since Anthony Rendon is still out. $5,100. I know he's pretty expensive, but he was not that bad last year whatsoever. He had a 646 slugging, 354 ISO, 393 WOBA, and a 293 batting average. So, I mean, I realize he's expensive, and I know it's not the best name value in the world, but numbers are pretty good. Joey Gallo, $4,400. I like Dylan Bundy today, so if you're playing Bundy, you wouldn't want to play Gallo because you're just kind of limiting your upside there, but it's Joey Gallo. He's a boomer bust player. He's either going to get a strikeout, a walk, or a home run. That's kind of the only things you're going to get with Joey Gallo. There's 3 outcomes there. He'll get the occasional base knock and double, but for the most part, strikeout, walk, or home run for Gallo here. But I like Bundy, so if you're playing Bundy, don't play Gallo. If you're not, it'd be nice to probably hedge and use Gallo and hope he takes him deep a couple of times. Then Justin Upton, $3,700. I think we've mentioned almost every single player in the Angels so far, but they all grade out as pretty strong plays for me. I know Upton's a shell of his former self, and he's pretty dusty these days, but hitting in a pretty good spot in the order. There's plenty of RBI opportunity here, and I'd probably get to Upton over Walsh in cash games just to save some money and go elsewhere with that. So I like Upton for the price point, basically. And AJ Pollock, $3,100. If you want a cheap part of a good stack, kind of similar to Justin Upton, AJ Pollock here always has had some really good splits versus left-handed pitching. This allows you to get some access to the Dodgers stack without breaking the bank either, because $3,100 does grade as one of the better value bats on the entire slate. I know he hits near the bottom of the order, but versus lefties last season, elite numbers, really. 345 batting average, 473 ISO, 201 WRC plus, OPS close to 1,200. Doesn't really strike out much either. High fly ball rate. So, yeah, I like AJ Pollock quite a bit at $3,100, and you're probably going to have to dig down that low, especially if you're playing like guys like Mike Trout today, Shohei Ohtani, and you're spending up a pitcher. You might have to go expensive at catcher. So AJ Pollock's kind of necessary value down low at a position where it doesn't look, I mean, outfield doesn't look that great today. Usually I have like almost 10 guys here. I only have around 5. So I think AJ Pollock grades out pretty well for me. That being said, guys, I think that's going to be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out. I do appreciate it. Leave your comments down below if you want access to the optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, projections, Discord community, all that fun stuff. Join us. There's around 300 of us. Link is down below for that. But hope the start to your week is fantastic, and I'll see you guys in the next video.